All right, so today I wanted to make a quick video explaining some of the roots that the teaching and the doctrine of the Trinity has in the Hebrew Bible. And this is significant because there are other religions such as Judaism who affirm the Hebrew Bible, but yet they don't believe that in the doctrine of the Trinity, and that is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are all three different distinct people, but yet they're all one being, and that is the supreme God Yahweh that we find in the Old Testament. So, looking at this idea that the Trinity has its roots in the Hebrew Scriptures is contradicting to what Judaism teaches, and also too for people such as Jehovah Witnesses, who believe that Jesus was created and that he's not eternal. And that is the key question, is the eternality of Jesus. And that's why Christianity is Christianity, because we believe in the doctrine of the Trinity, that he is God in the flesh. And yet if he was created, then he's not really God in the flesh, because only God is the only eternal being. So we're going to look through the Hebrew Scriptures this morning, which really is just a fancy way of saying the Old Testament that all of us Christians have in our Bibles, the Old Testament and New Testament. But we're going to look specifically in what's called the Hebrew Bible, which is, once again, the Old Testament that Judaism uses, and prove how the Trinity has its roots founded in the Hebrew Scriptures. So where even if you did not have the New Testament, you still could derive the plurality of God, that there are more than one divine being, persons in God who recognize themselves as God. So we're going to start just in the first book of the Bible, in Genesis. This isn't going to be an extremely detailed and long thing. I'm probably going to do different parts to this, but this is just the first one. I don't want them to be long videos, so I'm just going to go over 3 examples from just the first book of the Bible, in Genesis. All right, so just looking at Genesis 1, this is just the first verses. We read in Genesis 1, verses 1 through 2, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Pretty simple to understand, right? And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. So I have already right here that there's a distinction being made between God and his Spirit. Because if the biblical author really just meant that it was specifically just this one being, God, who was one person, then he would have just wrote, and God moved upon the face of the waters. But you see that there's a distinction already being made in the first 2 verses between God and his Spirit. So we see that God is a being and that he has a spirit. It's not just specifically that God is one being that is a spirit. It's that this is God and he has ownership of this spirit, the Spirit of God. So, yes, there could be a case made that this still is the same, and yeah, I could get that. But you also still see how, thinking critically about this text, that you can see that there is a distinction being made between God and his Spirit. And yet we see here that his Spirit is moving upon the waters. So God created, yet it was the Spirit who was over the waters, right? And we know, in light of the New Testament, now I know that the whole idea of this video is just using the Hebrew Bible, but this is just for furthering the expounding upon that the New Testament does from the Hebrew Bible. It's expounding upon this. So God, we read right here, this is the context of John 4 is when Jesus is meeting the Samaritan woman at the well, and he tells her, God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. Okay, so God is a spirit. But yet, once again, in verses 1 through 2, we see that the biblical author, which by tradition is accredited to Moses, we see that Moses is distinguishing between God and his spirit already in the first 2 verses. So once again, just thinking critically about the text, not trying to read into the text, but just thinking critically about it. Now, here we go into verse 3. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. So I have right here, God showing physical characteristics while at the same time only identified as a spirit. Points to a higher complexity or a plurality to him and his nature. So once again, we can affirm that God is a spirit. God is a spirit, but yet God is speaking right here and he is seeing right here, which are 2 characteristics that only physical and a physical reality can one have. Okay, now once again, I'm not trying to read into the text, but just thinking critically about it. These are physical characteristics that God is displaying for us in the 3rd verse of the Bible, and we see that Speaking and seeing, this is one ways in which he creates. That he spoke in physical reality came, and that he saw this physical reality, while yet at the same time his spirit, he is spirit. Okay, so we see once again just furthering understanding these distinctions of what's going on here. So let's move on to the next part in Genesis chapter 1 that I think is going to kind of tie all this together into what I'm trying to say. So Genesis 1 verse 26, and God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish and of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So I have here that this verse gives clarity to the current complexity and plurality of God that is found in the leading verses in Genesis 1. And what I mean by that is, for everything I just explained, that in the first verse there's a distinction between God and his spirit, and that the second verse and third verse we see that God is speaking and seeing, which are physical characteristics of a physical person, a physical body. And that's why I say that this is giving some clarity to that, in the sense that we're being made, Adam is being made, a physical being is being made, and we're being told that it's in the image of God. Okay, so it's in the image of him. So if we're being made in the image of him and he's making a physical creature, then there must be a physical aspect to him as well. And no, I'm not saying that there's contradictions in the Bible. What I am saying is, and what I mean by that is where in John 4, verse 24, where Jesus said that God is a spirit. I'm not saying that God is a spirit. That's what Jesus is saying, and I'm affirming that in the sense that he's a spirit and he's physical. I'm not saying he's just a spirit. I'm saying he's physical. I'm sorry, that he is a spirit and he's physical. And what I mean by that is that Jesus Christ was there in the beginning. That him and his physical form was there in the beginning. And this only makes sense because let us make man in our image. If God is a spirit and only a spirit, then how could we be made in his image? Yes, we're made in his image in the sense that we have spirits as well, but Adam is being made in a physical sense, as a physical being. So if that's the case, then there must be a higher plurality of God who is that there is a physical sense to him there in the beginning, because how therefore could Adam be a physical being? If he's made just clearly in the image of God, then he must be a spirit. But yet we see Adam is made in a physical too. He's a physical being, a physical reality. So there must be a physical sense to God. And we saw that in him seeing and speaking. So once again, I have right here God's spirit over the waters and God displaying physical characteristics, speaking and seeing, like I just said. We know that there was a physical sense being explained to God in the first three verses, but yet we can affirm that God is just a spirit. But once again, let us make man in our image. There must be a physical nature to him as well for us to be made physically in his image. In light of the New Testament, we know this must be the Son. This must be Jesus Christ. This is the only way that there's no contradictions in the Bible, by saying God is a spirit, yet here we have God making Adam in his image, which is a physical image. We are not made after the image of angels. It logically can only be the Son, Jesus Christ. And God speaks to himself and says, let us make man in our image. Well, who's the us? Who's the us? This is why I said that the Trinity finds its roots in the Hebrew scriptures. Because who is the us? God's not speaking to the angels. We're not made in the image of angels. We are made in the image of God in the fact we have a spirit, we have a conscience, we have a free will. We have the capacity to love, the capacity to hate, the capacity to be holy, the capacity to be all these things, but yet God is still obviously transcendent above us. But my point being is, we have a conscience, we have a mind, we can think, we have free will, but on top of that, we are physical. He made us in his image. So to wrap all this up, I hope this all makes sense. I'm not trying to make a super long video, but just kind of wanted to walk through some simple verses to think critically about them, about how God does display physical characteristics in the first few verses of the Bible, while at the same time the Bible affirms that God is a spirit. Also, too, God does show that there is a plurality to him, that there's a distinction between him himself and his spirit already being made. And then once again, we see in Genesis 1 to chapter 1 verse 26, where God is speaking to himself, saying, let us make man in our image. So we're made in the image of God, who is a spirit, but yet at the same time showing physical characteristics in the beginning of Genesis, that we know that God must have physical characteristics to him, because we're made in his image and we are physical beings. So I hope this makes sense, and how I can start to build a case how there is the roots of the Trinity are found in the Hebrew Scriptures. I'm obviously not going to be able to do it all in these few short verses, but this is just going to be one part to a longer type of teaching, type of things to extract from the Bible. So I hope this helps, and God bless you.